Welcome to Navigating the Customer Experience. Want to improve your organization's customer service? Looking for insider tips to knock your customer socks off? Then you're in the right place. Here's your host, Yannick Grant.
Welcome to Navigating the Customer Experience. On today's episode, our guest is David Friedman. David is an award-winning CEO, entrepreneur, author, and renowned public speaker. In 2011, he published his first book, Fundamentally Different, which is based on the insights he learned and taught throughout his leadership career. And in 2018, he published his second book, Culture by Design, the definitive how-to manual for building a high-performance culture. His current company, High Performing Culture, has helped hundreds of companies throughout North America to implement his culture operating system, CultureWiseä. So without further delay, sit back, relax, plug your earphones in, and let's jump right into this conversation with David. Welcome, David.
Well, thank you, Noah. Nice to get a chance to chat with you.
Great. All right, David, can you share with us a little bit about your journey, please? How it is that you got to where you are today? We like to always ask our guests in their own words if they can just share with us a little bit about who they are and how it is that they got to where they are today.
Sure, you bet. So I live in the Philadelphia area. I spent 27 years as the CEO of an employee benefits consulting company. And I grew that company from a couple people to a little bit over 100 people. And during the years that I was growing that company, we were very, very successful in almost every dimension you can look at. But the foundation of all of our success, everything that made us successful was the culture that we had created in that company. And as the CEO of that company, I did a lot of things in a very intentional way to make that culture happen. I eventually sold the company to a large multi-billion-dollar company, ended up retiring from that industry, and I wrote my first book, which was called Fundamentally Different. You referred to it before. And it was a book about the things I had done in my career that made us so successful, specifically around culture. And what ended up happening is people started reading that book and getting a lot of value from it. And they started asking me if I would come to speak to their organizations about the things about which I had written. And so next thing I knew, I was traveling around the country, giving talks to CEOs, and people started hiring me to help them. And next thing I knew, I was in a new career. And so over the last 7 or 8 years, I've given more than 500 workshops on this material, typically to CEOs and other leaders, worked with hundreds and hundreds of companies helping them do it, and have written 3 books on the topic. And so it all comes from the experience that I had leading a company myself and what I learned and what I now teach people.
All right. Your first book that you wrote, Fundamentals. I know at the beginning of the conversation you had mentioned that one of your fundamentals is quick response time, which was music to my ears. Could you share with our listeners what are some of the other things that is the core of your fundamental practices?
Sure. So let me give you just some overall context for your listeners, and then that answer will make more sense. So what I teach people is that in any organization, I don't care what organization it is, the culture in that organization has an enormous influence over everything that happens, from customer service to everything else that takes place. And so as leaders, we should be intentional about creating the culture that we want to have. One of the important elements, and probably the most important element in creating a really great culture, or any culture for that matter, is being clear about, well, what are the behaviors that you say, boy, if we could get all of our people living to these behaviors, this is the kind of organization I want to have. And I give those behaviors a name. It's just my nomenclature. I call them fundamentals because I think they're fundamental to success. So we help organizations define their culture in terms of a set of very specific behaviors. In my particular company, and this is my company, it doesn't have to be the same for a different company, but in my company, some of our fundamentals, the one you're asking about a moment ago, is one that we call be a fanatic about response time. Some of the others that I teach in my own company are things like honor commitments, practice blameless problem solving, get clear on expectations, be a generous listener, These are actions, that they're things that people do. And you get people doing these kinds of things, you create a very different kind of organization. So those are just some samples of the fundamentals I teach in my own company.
Great. And those are also in the book, right?
Yes.
Okay. Could you share with us why you think those things are critical to creating a culture where, customer experience, of course, is, at its utmost best, because clearly a lot of organizations have many challenges in trying to get their customer experience to be consistent. How is it that, you go into these organizations? I'm sure a lot of their issues is, everybody's not doing what they're supposed to be doing. How do we get the people to be passionate? How do we get them to operate like how we do? I wish I could clone myself and, have 100 of me,
Yes.
but the reality is you can't. So how do we get everybody on the same page?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the foundation of the system that I teach is, there are 8 steps to it, but let's just boil it down to its essence. There are 2 things that are critical for success. And this is true whether we're talking about customer experience or we're talking about innovation or we're talking about anything, even a sports team, a family. It's, you want to get a group of people to be consistent so that you can clone yourself. There are 2 things that are critical. The first is what we were just talking about. We have to be crystal clear about the expectations. So frequently, I hear leaders frustrated that people aren't being the way they want them to be, but they haven't been clear enough about what they expect. They're just annoyed that people haven't somehow miraculously by osmosis figured it out themselves. So the first step is absolute clarity about what is it that we expect of people. And when we talk about that clarity, one of the ways that companies try to do that and fail is that the typical way of doing that is they create a list of core values. And they look wonderful on the website, except most of the time they're so broad and so nebulous that they don't really bring enough clarity.
Mm-hmm.
I make a big deal about the difference between what I call values and what I call behaviors. So a value is an abstract idea. Quality, integrity, loyalty, service, teamwork, those are wonderful words, but they mean so many different things to different people that they're very difficult to operationalize. Behaviors are actions. They're things people do. And because they're action oriented, they're a lot easier to be coaching people about. It's very difficult to coach somebody about their values. It's a lot easier to coach them about their behaviors. So the first step is this defining with way more clarity exactly what we expect in terms of a set of behaviors, or as I noted a moment ago, I call fundamentals. Now, once we have that, it's great to have them listed and have more clarity, but here's the real key step, and this is so simple. I call it creating rituals. So a ritual is a routine, a habit, something that we do all the time. And the reason that rituals are so important is that most people, and you've seen this, most people aren't very good at sticking with things. We come up with all kinds of wonderful ideas, and then we get busy and life gets in the way and they fall by the wayside. So the company comes up with the big new program, and for 3 months or even 3 weeks, everybody's all excited about the new program, and then they falls by the wayside. When something becomes a ritual or a routine, it's not difficult to continue it. It's just part of our routine. So I'll give you a simple example in another area, and then I'll take it back to this topic of service and business. You wake up in the morning, you brush your teeth. We get up, before a ball game in the States, we do the national anthem. There are just routines about how you operate. Some people before a meal, they say a prayer. When something is a routine like that, it's not hard to do. So the way we use that simple concept is we take these fundamentals, as I call them, and we begin to focus on one fundamental every week through a series of rituals. So week number 1, everybody in the company all week long is thinking about working on focusing on fundamental number 1. The week after that, everybody in the company is on number 2, and the week after that, 3, and we keep cycling through them. So let me give you one simple example of a ritual to illustrate it for your listeners. So one of the rituals that I practice in my company, and all of our clients do this as well, is that every time we have a meeting in our company, whether it's a project team meeting, a department meeting, a virtual meeting, if we have a meeting in our company this week, every single one of those meetings, the first agenda item of the meeting is the fundamental of the week. And we spend the first few minutes of the meeting talking about this week's fundamental and what it means. So my company's fundamental this week, I mentioned it before actually, is called Practice Blameless Problem Solving. So every time we have a meeting anywhere in our company this week, the first agenda item is going to be a 3 or 4 minute discussion about practicing blameless problem solving. That gets us lots of chances to teach and teach and teach and teach. So if we start by defining really clearly the behaviors that are important in our organization, and then we have a structured, systematic way to teach those behaviors over and over and over and over again, sooner or later, those behaviors are going to become internalized in our people. And that's how you get yourself cloned. What most people do is they, again, either aren't clear enough or they put stuff out there and then they figure, okay, I talked about it once, or it's on the wall, or it's on the website. How come everybody doesn't do it? Well, you need repetition. Without repetition, we don't learn anything.
That is so true. I mean, I said that in training so many times. Like, when you're teaching children ABC, you don't just go to school one day and the teacher says, okay, this is the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G to Z. And then they never say it again. It's like constantly being, reinforced with the kids. They sing to it. They sing ABC songs to them. They read to them about ABC. They talk to them about ABC. They have pictures. So it's constantly being reinforced. And as you mentioned, repetition. And adults learn just like children.
We do. It's how humans work. And yet somehow in most organizations, we think that people are just going to magically figure it out without that repetition. I'll give you a very good example of actually where I learned all of this originally, and it relates very directly to customer service. So one of the organizations that is world-renowned for incredible customer service experiences is the Ritz-Carlton hotel chain. Mm-hmm. I mean, if there ever was an icon for extraordinary customer experiences, it would probably be Ritz-Carlton. And many years ago, I had an experience where I brought my company to a Ritz-Carlton for a day of brainstorming about great service. And knowing how great they were, I asked them if they could share during our lunch with them some of the things that they do. And they do a very specific thing that really became the foundation for the concept behind what I teach. At Ritz-Carlton, they have 20 behaviors that they have articulated about delivering great customer experiences. And these behaviors are called their basics, the Ritz-Carlton basics, and there are 20 of these. And every day they have a ritual that's called the daily lineup. And a daily lineup, what happens is in every Ritz-Carlton property in the world, in every department and in every shift, the team members get together at the beginning of the shift and they gather around for a 10 or 12-minute meeting known as the daily lineup. And the first thing they do in their daily lineup is they talk about the basic of the day. So if today were day number 1, in every department, every shift, our people would be getting together and they'd be kicking off their shift with a brief meeting, and they'd start the meeting talking about basic number 1. Tomorrow, everybody would be on number 2, and the next day, number 3, and so on. And at the end of 20 days, they go back to the beginning, and they do it over and over and over again every day of their entire career. And that's how they get people to absorb and internalize the things that lead to extraordinary experience. They don't do it by just hoping they're going to get really nice people and it will all work out. They teach these things every single day with repetition. Makes sense?
Makes sense. Total sense. And you're right. I mean, Ritz-Carlton is like that's the gold standard that everybody is aiming to achieve. And they're, sometimes people think, is it that they got like really amazing people, but they probably have the same level or standard of people in terms of their recruitment. But as you said, their technique and their strategy in terms of what they're doing, it makes sense because it's being repeated, it's being reinforced. People are being held accountable, and now it becomes almost a part of your DNA. Because if you're doing something over and over again, it becomes so a part of you. Like I remember when I went to high school, I went to a Catholic high school. we were not allowed to walk on the grass. It was completely forbidden. And I
Uh-huh.
recently went on vacation with my daughter to an Airbnb in Ocho Rios, and she just walked across the grass, and I had to walk on the path and go around. And like the little light bulb went off in my head, and I said, Jenny, why didn't you walk on the grass? And I said, because it's not allowed. But it's something that I had to do for 7 years, and so it actually became a part of me like I think it was like an unconscious behavior, because it was after I
Yes,
thought about what I did that I was able to dissect and say, okay, that's the reason why I did it.
exactly. And so take that same thought and now let's apply that same exact thinking to customer service or any kind of thing that we're trying to get in our culture. If we want our people to be so unconscious, so automatic about how they deliver fantastic service, well, we have to tell them, well, what is it? What are the behaviors that if you were doing these things every day, that would create amazing service experiences? We have to be crystal clear about them. And then just like the way you learn not to walk on the grass, we have to teach those things over and over and over and over again with enough repetition so that they become internalized by our people. And once they become internalized by our people, well, that's just the way we do things around here. It
Yeah,
starts to happen.
yeah,
And it's such a simple idea.
true, simple, yet profound. Yet many people are not doing it.
Most aren't.
Yeah. Okay, David, can you share with us, maybe, you're in this industry, you're teaching about culture, you're teaching about behaviors. Can you share with us maybe one or two things, trends that you see emerging? We're coming out of a pandemic. Not sure, if you've noticed anything in the States, where you are from in your neighborhood, if you've noticed anything that's different in terms of people's behaviors. Have you found that customers have become more heightened to the quality of experience that they're expecting? Especially seeing that, safety is now the new buzzword in terms of how safe you make your customers feel. Do you see any emerging trends in relation to things that leaders in organizations need to focus on more, even more now than before the pandemic, probably for the next 2 or 3 years?
Yes, I would say a couple things. So, first thing I would say that's very related to the pandemic is obviously we have gone to people working in remotely in a way that didn't exist before. And even as vaccines become more prevalent and the pandemic gets behind us, certainly almost everybody recognizes that we will continue to have a high number of people, never more than ever before, that will continue to work remotely. So some people will be back at the office, but there will be many, many people who will forever work remotely or in some hybrid kind of environment where some are in person and some are working remotely. And that has enormous impacts, specifically as it relates to culture, that if your culture was mostly a function of people being together every day, and somehow by example people were figuring out, I guess this is how things happen around here, but there was no overt methodology for teaching. It was just leadership by example. Well, if I'm not seeing you anymore because we're not physically together, well, then you're going to have some real struggles if there's no other structured way to convey culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's become more important than it ever used to be systematic about how we create our culture because we can't rely on people being together anymore.
Yeah,
And I think that's a significant, significant shift.
nice.
I would say I would say the second shift that I see, and I don't know that this is so much a function of the pandemic as much as it is just a general societal business trend, is certainly there's a trend toward more self-service where there are, many clients and many buyers who want to be able to access tools and resources on their own, where before, so the definition of what does great service mean has changed. Great service used to mean very high touch personal interaction. And so in some cases, that's still true. But there are many other people, especially the younger generation, who their attitude about service is Just give me the tools to do it myself. I don't want somebody pestering me. I don't want this intense personal relationship. And again, obviously this varies with the person and the product, but in many things, especially the younger generation, just give me the tools to go online and do it myself, and I'm a happy camper. I don't need anybody to be talking to me. In fact, I don't even want to talk to somebody. I just want to be able to do it. And so I think the implication of that trend is that businesses need to be able to provide multiple ways for people to get the service that they need. If I'm a customer that wants high touch, then I'm going to be frustrated if I can't find anybody to talk to. And so you need to be able to provide that for me. But if I'm the customer who doesn't want to talk to somebody, you need to provide me with avenues to do self-service. So I think responding to the variety of ways in which people want to receive service, companies need to have a number of different methods.
Right. Okay. Those are really, really good points. And you are right. Self-service is definitely something that people want. I definitely have seen that as a higher emergence. As a matter of fact, locally, when I try to reach out to my utility companies, I find I get through to them much quicker through the chatbots that they have on their websites than actually calling them on the telephone. You get through much quicker. You sit there on the phone for 56 minutes, 70 odd minutes, some ridiculous times, just listening to this awful music or recording that they have going on over and over again. But you go online and it's like there's more response. The response time is much faster, and the person online is in a better position to assist you.
Yeah. Did you ever read, there's a great book called The Effortless Experience. Did you ever read that book?
Yes. We actually had the author on our podcast, maybe I think a year and a half ago.
I think that's a great book.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
And I think one of the points they make in that book is that the challenge is mostly there are these different ways that people want to access service. And the problem comes if the way that I want to do it doesn't work, if I have to switch methods. So if I want to call somebody and I can't get through because I'm on hold for 45 minutes, I'm going to be really frustrated. Mm-hmm. If I want to be able to go online and do it myself, and I try it and it's too confusing and I have to give up and pick up the phone and call somebody, then I'm going to be frustrated too. Mm-hmm. So I need to have different methods to respond to different customers' desires, and each of them has to work well. If the way that I try to get my service doesn't work and I have to switch to method number 2, that's where you really frustrate your customers and they leave.
Yeah, I agree. Totally agree. All right, David, can you share with us if you have an app, a tool, or a website that you absolutely can't live without in your business?
Yes. So I have found that in my whole career that being well organized is an absolutely critical element of success. That if you don't have good systems for keeping on top of everything you need to do, things fall through the cracks, and it's extraordinarily difficult to deliver great service to people. It's hard to honor your commitments if you don't have a good way to track all your commitments. It's hard to be a fanatic about response time if things slip through the cracks because you didn't keep track of it all. So systems to keep track of everything you need to do are critical to me. There's a system that I used many years ago that was back then, and then there's an updated version, but back then I was a big Franklin Planner user and a software version of the Franklin Planner. When I, a number of years ago, switched to an Apple environment from a PC environment, Franklin Planner never came out with an Apple version. But there's a different company that created a product that is almost identical to what Franklin Planner software was, and it's called Opus One, OPUS 1. And it's basically a planning tool to allow you to keep track of task management, everything you need to accomplish in your life. And how do I keep track of it? How do I prioritize it? How do I make sure nothing is ever forgotten? And I can't imagine how I would function without that. Everything I need to do in my life is there. I look at it every day, and it's scary to think about what life would be like if I didn't have a tool like that.
All right, so I haven't heard of that one, but I'll definitely have it in the show notes of this episode, that any of our listeners who want to tap into that organizational tool, they could definitely utilize and get that benefit as well. David, can you share with us one or two books that have had the biggest impact on you? I know you mentioned one earlier, The Effortless Experience, but maybe any others that it could have been a book you read a very long time ago, or even one that you read recently, but it really has impacted you.
I would say that, so certainly that was one of them. I would say a book that I just finished rereading, or actually more accurately, listening to. I read it years ago and I just re-listened to it, is Malcolm Gladwell's Tipping Point. I read that when it came out, I think it came out in like 2002. And for some reason, I just came across my attention recently and I listened to it on Audible. And I really think it's a fascinating book and gives me pause to think a lot about the things that we're doing. And for those of your listeners who may not have read or heard The Tipping Point, Malcolm Gladwell, the author, looks at social epidemics. How does an idea all of a sudden take off and spread, whether it's a fashion, whether it's a product, whether it's a service, and all of a sudden something goes from nobody knows about this, and then at a certain point, everywhere you look, people are talking about that or reading about it or heard of it. And how does that actually take place? Where's the tipping point where all of a sudden it goes viral? And why does that happen? What are the factors that contribute to something going viral? It's a fascinating book. Highly recommend it.
Very good. All right. So we will have that one in the show notes of this episode as well. Now, David, could you share with our listeners if there is something that you are really excited about? One thing that's going on in your life right now that you're really excited about. It could be something that you're working on to develop yourself or your people.
I would say the biggest thing I'm excited about is the opportunity to scale what we're doing. And what I mean by that is that the concepts that I teach, as you've heard even just in a cursory way in this podcast, the idea that if we really want to drive the culture in an organization, it really comes down to two very simple things. Define really clearly the behaviors that drive success, and then create this structured, systematic way to teach those over and over and over again. And if you do that, you're going to be really successful. I call that whole concept, I call it the power of fundamentals. That when we have a set of fundamentals that drive our success, and then we have a way to teach it, it has an unbelievable impact. So the power of the fundamentals is just such a powerful idea and such an impactful idea. And I'm really excited and enthusiastic about the work that we're doing in our company to spread that idea so that not just hundreds or thousands of people, but ultimately millions of people can leverage those concepts and apply that to improve their families, their children, their companies, their sports teams, their churches. It applies in every walk of life. And so the opportunity to spread those ideas and give people tools that enable them to be more successful is just a very exciting and rewarding challenge.
Okay, sounds good. All right. Now, our listeners would have tapped into this podcast and they are quite intrigued with what it is that you have shared with us as it relates to culture and just developing an organization where people are practicing a specific set of behaviors. Can you share with us where our listeners can find you online? They're very intrigued. They want to know more about what you're doing. They maybe want to purchase your book. They want to follow you on your journey. Where can they find you online?
Yes, the best place to find me is our website. And our website is CultureWiseä, like the word culture and then the word wise, W-I-S-E. So CultureWiseä.com. And on the website are lots of simple videos that explain the concepts, really easy to understand material there. There's also links there to my books, and you can also get them on Amazon or Audible. The most recent book, which was published this spring, is an updated version of my original book called Culture by Design. So if you look up on Amazon or Audible, Culture by Design, you'll see two versions, the original and the second edition. The second edition has updated new material in it. But again, readers can get there on Amazon, or if you prefer listening to audiobooks, I do the audiobook narration myself, and it's on Audible. So you can find them there as well.
Very good. All right. Now, before we wrap our episodes up, we always like to ask our guests, do you have a quote or saying that during times of adversity or challenge, you will revert to this quote? It kind of helps to get you refocused, maybe because you got derailed or, you just got off track. And so this quote kind of just brings you back to center to focus on what's really important.
Well, I'm going to broaden that. And so, yes, and it's a quote that is more related to organizations, but it's as equally important individually.
Okay.
So for organizations, as it relates to culture, the quote that I say often and really centers me is I say that good companies have good cultures by chance, but world-class companies have world-class cultures by design. And what I mean by that is that when I look at those companies and those individuals who are most successful, they don't do anything that's so incredibly unusual. I sometimes say they do ordinary things with extraordinary consistency. They just are very purposeful about everything they do. That good, reasonably, moderately successful people naturally are gifted and they do a lot of things successful just almost by accident. But the most successful people, the most successful companies it's by design. They're incredibly intentional about everything they do. So if I look at my own work, it's about not just relying on instincts, but being really systematic and really intentional about practicing day after day after day the things that lead to success.
All right. Very good. That's an excellent quote. Thank you so much for sharing, David.
My pleasure.
Well, David, thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to hop on this podcast with us and share all of these amazing insights and nuggets and just, about your journey, about all of the things that your company is doing, about the organizations that you've helped, about behaviors, which is so, so important to creating that culture that you want, to ensuring that people are not just doing things because they're told to do it, but because it has now become a part of who they are. So the organization benefits, but the individual, I think, benefits as well, because now they've grown. They've been able to do things to a level where it's now an unconscious behavior. And I mean, that to me, if we have more organizations like that, more people like that, I think the world will definitely be a better place. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. You're welcome.
All right. Wanted to remind our listeners, please feel free to log on to Facebook and join our private Facebook group, Navigating the Customer Experience Community, and follow us on Twitter at NavigatingCX. Until next time, I'm your host, Yannick Grant. We also have a new book available on Amazon, The ABCs of a Fantastic Customer Experience. It's available in ebook and paperback. So if you want to increase revenue in your organization, build a stronger service culture, and create employees or develop employees who are really mastering service delivery in your business, you need to grab a copy of this book. Until next time, I'm your host, Yannick Grant.
Thanks for listening. For more awesome resources to take your customer service game to another level, head over to navigatingthecustomerexperience.com. See you next time.